There's this misconception online that the Leica is like the best photography tool. And the truth is that it's probably far from that. I think it's the best photography tool for one specific style of photography. And that style of photography just so happens to be street photography.
Photography is about finding out what can happen in the frame. When you put four edges around some facts, you change those facts.
You know, I've used a ton of different cameras over the years, especially with this YouTube channel, just trying out different SLRs, point and shoots and whatnot. But there's no other camera I've shot the most than the Leica camera. And I think it's because it perfectly suits the style of photography that I do. First starting out, I was looking at what my favorite photographers were shooting with, and it varied really, but most of them seemed to use Leica cameras, and I never really understood why until I started to shoot with one. My thing is, you know, shoot whichever camera you feel best suits your style of street photography. If that's a point and shoot, you know, so be it. If that is an SLR camera, so be it. It just so happens that, you know, my favorite photographers when I was getting started all shot Leicas for some reason. And I wanted to know exactly why. You know, I started out shooting with basically SLR cameras from like Minolta. I even got into like a Nikon F3 at some point, and it worked, you know, for the first couple of months, I would say. But then I got a rangefinder, and I realized that everything an SLR does on the street is kind of slow. You know, when you focus in with an SLR camera, you kind of see the depth of field preview, and when you're on the street, sometimes that's not something you want to see. You know, things are moving, you know, everything is chaotic. You need to catch focus right away. And how are you able to essentially capture that focus quickly without sacrificing the time in the moment? And I think that's when the SLR camera started to really shine in. Now this is my Leica M6. This has been my favorite camera to use. It's the most camera, or this is the camera that I've shot the most over the last few years. She's a little beat up, but as you can see on a standard rangefinder, you're gonna have a focusing tab on the lens, which is gonna allow you to select the distance for focus. All you have here is a shutter speed dial, and then inside there is a light meter to tell you whether or not you have the proper exposure. Other than that, that is the entire camera. You have a viewfinder up here, and you have a rangefinder patch, and that's pretty much it. You don't get to see everything that an SLR would give you. You know, an SLR shows you the depth of field, it shows you your shutter speed in the viewfinder, all this crazy information. Some of them even have auto exposure. The Leica just doesn't have that. And the reason why it's such a good tool for street is because it's such a bare bones camera that it allows you to focus more so on the moment rather than wasting your time fiddling with all of your different settings. And so, you know, that's just one reason why I prefer to shoot with a Leica camera on the streets. But the downside to a rangefinder camera is it's really just a bare bones camera. You don't get to get all of the really fun features, the double exposures, all that stuff. It purely is a tool to document the moment as is right now. Now, I like to look at this camera as if it were an instant camera. And what I mean by that is it can take an image of everything right now. There's different techniques that I'm gonna actually show you in the second half of this video to where you can essentially set the camera up to have the right exposure, to have your focus pretty much preset. And all you have to do is point the camera up to your face and make an image. Now, one of my favorite photographers is Henri Cartier-Bresson, and something he always talked about was a photograph is essentially just an instant sketch. And it's up to you, you know, to place things within the frame and to compose them in a way that looks organic, in a way that looks beautiful, in a way that shows emotions and whatnot. And I feel like with an SLR camera, with you having to essentially adjust your focus on the fly and being able to see exactly what's in and what's not in focus, it kind of draws away from you being able to react to the moment. That's kind of the beauty and magic of shooting with a rangefinder camera. You're only worrying about what goes into your frame and how fast you can react to that situation.
Yeah, but if I'm doing it,
Now I want to to share with you how I set up the Leica camera in that particular way to essentially be able to photograph any given moment and never miss a shot. And it really comes down to 3 different techniques. The first one is going to be the exposure kind of technique that I try to use. Then it comes to zone focusing. And lastly, it's going to be mainly about positioning, camera positioning. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to the sponsor for this episode, which are the good folks over at Squarespace. Squarespace is your all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. You need your own professional website to represent yourself. And in my opinion, the best way to start a photography website is through Squarespace. With cutting-edge design tools, you can essentially choose one of their award-winning templates to get your website up and running within minutes, or you can use something called Blueprint AI, which uses AI technology to answer a few questions and craft the perfect website for you. You can also set up your own portfolio or gallery to display your work in the finest way possible, representing yourself online to not only clients and brands, but also to just showcase your best work. Lastly, if you wanted to set up an e-commerce shop, Squarespace has you covered with everything from invoicing, products and services, content and memberships. This is great looking for photographers to sell both digital as well as physical products. So to get started with your own photography website today, head over to squarespace.com/KingJapes and enter promo code KingJapes at checkout, and you guys can get 10% off of your first purchase of a domain or a website. Huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video.
Should have bought some from that guy, huh?
I did buy some actually. I bought some Kodak Gold.
Oh, you did?
Now, the way I like to set up my camera for street photography in terms of getting the right exposure is actually pretty simple. There's 3 steps, and it requires me to use the light meter in the camera and find out my 3 different exposures for 3 separate lighting scenarios. Now, this is the perfect example to show because we have all 3 different lighting scenarios. We have your highlight kind of filled setting right here, obviously in this area right here on the inside of the shadows. And then you have like your in-between where there's some highlights, there's some shadow, and you need to find what exposure that is right there. Now, luckily with film tends to have a really good exposure latitude. So if you overexpose the image slightly, it's still gonna look good. If you slightly underexpose it, you know, depending on how bad it is, it can get grainy, but for the most part, you know, 0.3 stops of underexposure is not going to really do anything crazy. And so shooting with a film Leica gives you a bit of extra kind of insurance to where you can find 3 different exposures for 3 different settings and figure that out on the fly. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what my highlight exposure is. They're saying proper exposure for the highlight area is f16, 1/500th of a second. Now I'm going to figure out my shadow exposure, and simply I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to point it here at the building, and here my shadow exposure, without even changing my shutter speed, is showing me that I'm at f4, 1/500th of a second, or I can go f5.6 at 1/250th of a second. But that's essentially my exposure anytime I encounter some type of shade. So now let's put it all together. We have your highlight at f16, 1/500th of a second. We have your shadow areas f4, 1/500th of a second. That's pretty much all I really need to know, especially if the light is going to stay the same the entire day. That's my baseline, f16, f4. Now, figuring out the in-betweens, which is where you're going to kind of find yourself most of the time, is difficult. What I like to do is I'll take my hand, I'm going to point the rangefinder patch in my camera over to where I see slight highlight on my hand, and then I'm also going to have shadows on one side of my hand here. So this would probably be right over here. So that way you can get an exposure for your highlight and your shadow areas. You see me doing this a lot on the street, that's essentially why. And it looks like right here, f8, 1/250th is my in-between exposure. So f16, f4, f8, right in between. With these 3 baseline exposures, I'm now able to go anywhere in the city and then just kind of engage, you know, what I think the light is gonna look like. So if it's mostly shadow filled, I'm at f16. If I, go to the shaded areas, I know I'm gonna be at like f4, f5, 6. And then if I'm gonna be in an area where it's sort of in between, where I have some highlights and I have some shadows, I can go to f8 and feel confident that I'm still gonna get the right exposure. Believe it or not, the Leica has the fastest focusing system out of any camera system currently being produced. Now, the reason why rangefinders are such a huge deal in street photography is because of a technique called zone focusing. Zone focusing allows you to use a more kind of like wide depth of field to be able to capture things within a range of focus. This way you can kind of preset your focus and then just guesstimate how far your subjects are in the frame based off of that depth of field. Take a look at the lens really quick here down below. You're gonna have 5.6, f8, f11, f16. While I'm shooting street, I mostly shoot at like 5.6 and f8. Now take a look at the lens on top. You're gonna have kind of mirrored aperture markings on each side of the lens there. And then you're gonna have that center line, which is gonna tell you what you have in focus. So you move the tab and that's where it focuses to. Now let's say I'm at f8 and I want to pre-focus my subjects to about 7 feet away. Based off of this scale, if you find the 8 here on each side, because we are again at f8, based on this scale, I have between roughly 4.5 feet all the way to about 10 feet, maybe even a little bit further in focus. So this means that if somebody is between that range, 4 feet and about 10 feet, they are going to be in focus, or I should say acceptable focus at the very minimum in your frame. And so it takes away kind of having to really focus with the camera, you know? So now all I have to do is kind of just guesstimate where they're gonna be in frame. So if I know between 4.5 feet and 10 feet is gonna be in focus, as long as they fall within that range, they are automatically in focus. That's why zone focusing with this camera is extremely, extremely powerful. That's why I say it's probably faster than autofocus, because your focus is already set in that range. You don't need to worry about focusing anymore. All you have to do now is pull the camera to your face and organize the chaos within. That's what you're doing with a Leica. You're organizing what you see within the frame. You're trying to figure out, you know, what pieces are stronger as a foreground, what pieces are stronger as your background, what textures, what colors can all go inside of there. That's all you have to worry about, because your focus is already set up, your exposure is already set up, and all you really have to do is figure out how to organize your frame. I tell people this all the time. You know, we're not photographers, we're just people who are good at organizing things within a box. With that said, the focusing tab also helps with focus. In this left side position here, I know that I'm at a close focus of about 1 foot away, about 12 inches. So that's already gonna be something stuck in my head. I know that's 1 foot away. And then on the flip side, if I advance this all the way to the right, I know that my camera is set to infinity focus. So let's just say, you know, they're not within that range that I have preset at f8. I know that if I position my lens all the way to the left, I'm at 1 foot. If I position myself all the way to the right, I am at infinity. And if I go right, dead center in the middle, I know my lens enough to know that we're about 4 feet away, 1.2 feet, which is powerful to know. And you can do this as well on an SLR camera, not just a rangefinder, but the difference between this and a SLR camera is you don't get the depth of field preview that the SLR has. So you might be preset to about 7 feet and have a range of like 4 feet to 10.5 feet, but you're only going to see what it looks like pre-focused to 4 feet. And this is what I mean by it kind of throws you off a little bit with the depth of field. You literally see what you get with an SLR camera. And with a rangefinder, just having that range and that flexibility to only focus on what goes in the frame, it's just a lot more powerful in my opinion, a lot more easy when you need to document moments on the fly.